Hey everyone, this is Anna Gressel, and you're listening to the AI Drop, your briefing on how AI is reshaping the future of business law and industry. We bring you fresh drops each week so you never miss a beat. Welcome to the podcast. Hello everyone. Today we're back with the second episode in our series on AI in the boardroom. Last time we set this table for why this belongs at the board level in many companies, but today we're going to get more practical and a little bit more personal for anyone who sits in the GC seat. Because if you're a GC right now, there's a good chance your board is asking you about AI. I could not be more thrilled to have my colleague and friend, Elizabeth Bieber, who everyone knows as Leza, on the podcast. Leza is a partner at Freshfields, and she's the head of our shareholder engagement and activism defense practice in New York. But really, her world is boards, and she spends a huge amount of time briefing boards on how to engage with the company's most pressing issues of the day. Increasingly, we cross over on AI issues, which is just super interesting and fun, and it's a real pleasure to get to work together. So if you are a GC, you're thinking about walking into your boardroom and grappling with all of the AI issues in front of you, there's no one you should be talking to more than Leza, and I'm super excited to welcome her to the AI Drop today.
Thanks for having me, Anna. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Me too. Let's kick us off with a bit of a lightning round. In one sentence, what is the question that boards are asking about AI right now?
What do I do? I mean, it doesn't get more basic than that, but I think the topic is overwhelming. The substance is moving lightning fast, and boards historically are not bodies that move at the speed of light, although they can move very quickly, of course, when there is reason to. But just trying to get a handle on it, I think, is where many boards are today.
That definitely resonates with what we see and hear from GCs. It's increasingly becoming pressing. Okay, let's move on. True or false? Most boards today have a clear owner for AI oversight.
False. 100% false. But that's not unusual. There are many times when boards delegate their responsibilities to a committee or a subcommittee, whether it's an established committee or an ad hoc committee. And if a board doesn't delegate it, it stays at the board level. And so there are many risk issues that sit with the full board intentionally. I don't think that level of intentionality has truly been explored in AI, but I also don't think that it is necessarily fatal for boards to not have figured out exactly who owns AI at the board level. And it is the case that I expect that for some boards, perhaps many boards, a lot of that oversight will actually end up sitting with the full board in the boardroom when boards spend a few minutes thinking about it.
Well, let's dig more into that later, but even just issues around the workforce versus issues around third-party risk. I mean, there are reasons there may be different committees of the board that are responsible for different pieces of AI as AI becomes increasingly kind of a whole company question, at least for certain enterprises.
Absolutely.
Let's look ahead just 2 years from now. Do you think AI literacy is going to be a qualification for some directors, for all directors?
Maybe some directors. And I say that because in some ways, AI is similar to cybersecurity, which we started to see a lot of maybe 10 to 15 years ago. In many ways, it is very, very different. I know we're going to dig into that later. But I think that the need for there to be specific AI experts on the board may be true for some boards, for sure, depending on what their business line is. But if you're an old line widget making company, being able to be fluent enough to have oversight will be important, but not necessarily an expertization seat in the boardroom.
Yeah, that seems right on point to me. And I think that's such a good teaser. Now let's take a step back. When you're talking with boards right now, or with GCs that are preparing for board briefings or education on AI, what are the conversations that are front and center? And what are some of the key issues that either directors or GCs in that posture are wrestling with?
Well, I think this breaks down to a bunch of different issues. One of it is, what are companies prepared to say to their boards? And there is this feeling in GCs or the C-suite, whoever is planning on presenting, that things should be pretty fully baked when you bring it to the board, right? The board is there to provide oversight. And there are some companies that really use their boards as thought partners, but there are many boards that use their boards as, okay, everything needs to be buttoned up and polished, and we need to know what we're saying, and we need to know what we're doing. AI is such a big issue and boards are asking about it because it is such a big issue and they keep hearing about it. I think there is a sense at a lot of companies that they're still figuring it out. They're building the plane while they're flying it. And so there's this tension between wanting to be fully prepared and being able to present a plan with a bow on top of it and it to look perfect. And also for there to be this vulnerability of, we don't really know and we're figuring it out. And one of the challenges in AI is that it moves so quickly, almost week to week. And yet board meetings occur 4, maybe 5 times a year, more if you really need them. And so what you're planning to say today to a board in 3 months may not be realistic 3 months from now. And how do you grapple with that oversight responsibility and that oversight consideration when there is something that is moving at the speed of light and changing companies so dramatically in a short period of time?
Yeah, I mean, there's an interesting piece of that, which is also like, what do you brief boards on? And thinking back a year or 2, 3 ago, there was kind of a pretty typical complement to board briefing on AI that involved some amount of education on what AI was even, and then some discussion of the AI governance program that a company had stood up. Now, they're really core strategy and business model discussions that are happening at companies around their use of AI, their competitors' use of AI. It's increasingly a complex competitive landscape. How do you think about the right balance between business opportunity, business threat around AI, and governance and oversight as board topics when you're thinking about setting that agenda?
I think you really hit on it about like the education component. How much do you need to educate your board? And I think at a lot of companies, the answer will be a fair bit. And there is, before you can even get into explaining how AI is changing your business, giving the board the information and the skills to be able to make the evaluations. We talked about expertization a little bit in the lightning round. It's not required that the board has a bunch of experts. There are some areas where you need to have specified knowledge to oversee, for instance, the financial statements. There are some qualifications that are needed. But for the most part, our board's directors are chosen based on the breadth of their experience and their judgment and their overall qualifications to be curious, to ask the right questions, to understand. But in order to even ask the questions and understand what's going on, there needs to be some baseline level of knowledge that is imparted. And so I think where companies are struggling is what's the level of education and how much education do they need and who provides that education? Is it going to be a third-party provider? Is it going to be the CISO or is it going to be someone else technical within the company? Are those people ready to educate and interact with the board at the board level? And how much is management going to help shape what is said? And then once you have that baseline of education, then you can get into here's how it's changing the business or threading it through all of the substantive conversations on strategy, on human capital management, on risk and acceptable levels of risk tolerance that boards routinely grapple with. But again, because things are moving so quickly, there's also this tension on how much education do you need and how will things change over time. Then putting that to the side, from a risk perspective, everything that you're talking on governance, those are the questions that I expect that will be the first questions the board asks. What do we have in place to protect ourselves? What are our risks? What are the legal and compliance risks? And what are the existential or strategic risks? And being able to frame this in a risk-based way is going to be what I think boards are really craving, even if they aren't able to put that language into place. But they want to know, how are we managing our risk on this? And what are the areas of risk? Like, help us understand the risk so that we can make risk-based decisions and figure out our own risk tolerance.
I think that's a moment that every GC is thinking about. What are the questions that we're going to get from our board, particularly from our more active, informed board members? So how do you think about that, Leza, when you're designing a board briefing agenda on AI? Like, do you look at the personalities of the directors? Do you look at the other companies they sit on and the kinds of briefings they may be getting from even different industries? Like, how much of a full picture view do you take of this with your GC clients?
There are so many areas where AI is different than anything else. But this is an area where I think that there is room to do what the board and what management and what the GC normally does. Making sure that when you're discussing AI, even though it's new and it's exciting and it's going to change the landscape, but making sure that you're discussing it in the way that is going to resonate with the board means that you're taking into account kind of the personalities of the boardroom and the general vibe of your board. How does your board normally engage on topics? If you come in too heavy-handed or you come in not specific enough, you run the risk of raising flags from your directors on why does this feel so different? I know this is a different moment in time, but like, why is this different? Or what are you trying to convey to me by not doing what you normally do? And then I think many GCs do consider what their directors are hearing from other boards. The directors benchmarking is how are other boards dealing with it? They're looking left and right. They're trying to understand where they sit. And so understanding where your directors are and what they're hearing and what they're experiencing in other places, I think is important, in part because it allows you to deliver information in a way that is going to feel right to that director and make them feel like that particular company is on top of things compared to what they do, but also to identify where there may be biases or differences. If the director's experience is on 2 other boards, and so the universe is 3, but the GC is benchmarking their competitors and their supply chain and those in their ecosystem, and they're looking at a much broader array, being able to course correct or to explain why there might be differences is going to be really important in framing that discussion. And I think smart GCs regularly do that, and they have that as part of their DNA. And so they shouldn't lose that because this is a new shiny toy.
Thinking even beyond the boardroom, you made the point earlier, everyone wants to go into a board briefing feeling like they've tied a bow around it or the messaging is very clear, very coherent, and they've kicked the tires internally on what the picture is that they're presenting to the board. I mean, we all think about that when we're going into board briefings with our clients. What are some of the other elements of the pre-work that GCs think about as they are approaching that board briefing? Does that require looking at AI governance? What other areas should GCs be looking at as they figure out what that picture is that they need to present to the board?
I think it's having the GCs have a deep understanding of what's going on substantively, but also what's going on from a control perspective. What are the policies? If you want the board to approve a policy, then there needs to be some pre-work in order to do that. If you want to be able to present some things with a bow on it, then understanding the compliance and the governance and the use and the limitations and the protections, being able to give the board confidence that management is doing what it needs to do is going to be important. Because on the one hand, while boards have an oversight responsibility, management and the GC have a real incentive to ensure that the board feels like management is and can run the day-to-day operations of the company, and they have the faith that it is being done in a way that is protective of the company and is advancing the strategy. And so in some ways, if you don't do this in a way that feels right to the board, you run the risk of having the board feel like they have to roll up their sleeves more and get more in the weeds to make sure that things are going the way that a board would expect it to go.
I definitely think planning for some amount of time in advance, like we often get brought in, what would you say, Lisa, like a month to several months before a major board briefing to do some pre-work with the management team. Is there a typical timeline that you recommend? Sometimes there's an inflection point or a different moment, or the company is accelerating adoption, feeling competitive pressure, and that's why we start to be in conversation with them. But what's your view on that?
I mean, I get to be a little bit selfish on this answer. If I had my druthers, and I think you don't disagree, I would love a 3-month runway. Really almost from the last board meeting. At the end of the board meeting, when you're like, maybe we're going to discuss AI next time, I would love for that call to come into us the next day, because the luxury of time in having that preparation, that ability to put a thoughtful policy into place, make sure that you have the right stakeholder buy-in, make sure you really understand, that all takes time. Do we need 3 months? No, of course not. We can, of course, do it in less. But if you want to do it in a way that feels like there's no fire drills or emergencies, we get a very long runway to kind of work through the issues and be thoughtful. 2 months is not bad. A month in, of course, we can do it, but there are things that we're going to be talking about in terms of what comes after the board meeting or how we do this in a month. if you call a week before, there are going to be limits about how much we really can do to do all of the proper prep work that you and I have been discussing.
Yeah, and I think it depends so much too on a GC's true feeling or assessment on where they are from a management perspective. Like, it's a really interesting point on AI governance. Sometimes AI governance can move really fast and you can stand things up really fast when everyone's aligned. But a lot of the time we get the call because people aren't aligned internally, or there's been some sort of breakdown, or there's been some sort of feeling that what is happening isn't working. And so sometimes diagnosing that and getting to working, we can move at any point, but a lot of it is making sure that it actually works for the organization and in a way that resonates for people. And we like to take a very client-centered approach. So I completely agree with you. We can do anything, but sometimes it's, you know, best as the GC, I would say, where you are in the process, and therefore like how much work really needs to be done to get to what is board ready for you.
So you're bringing up a really interesting point, because I think the word governance both scares and bores people at the same time. They are nervous because you hear governance and you hear, I'm going to have a bunch of policies and procedures and you're going to slow me down and I have to do all this extra work and it's not practical. It bores people because it's like, what governance feels so, I don't know, like no one really wants to deal with it. It is policies and procedures based, and no one wants, like, nobody sits down on Friday night with a glass of wine and reads a handbook, right? Like, that's not what people do.
We could have a Friday night handbook reading party.
I mean, if you want to come over and read handbooks together, I will never say no. But I don't think that's how most people approach it. On the other hand, when you talk about governance working in a way that is supportive of a business, it often comes into play in a crisis situation where you really need that infrastructure, or it comes into play exactly as you described it, in the bringing stakeholders together and figuring out what really works and having almost a smoothing out process and a relationship repairing process that is really necessary. Because you said we can do anything. I said we can do anything. You and I can write a policy and have a company adopt a policy tomorrow. But if we want that policy to be effective and if we want it to serve its purpose, then we have to have buy-in from people, and we have to have the right incentives so people don't just see it as another policy that they can go around or kind of ignore. Because it's not good governance to have the policy. It's good governance to have the policies and procedures drive the right behavior.
Could not agree more. And even just to benchmark us for the audience, and particularly people who don't live and breathe kind of board level oversight, we've been talking a lot about kind of management level policy, like AI governance, policies and procedures at the company level. Leza, what is your view on whether you need amendments to board or committee charters on AI, the kind of board governance level? Is there a change that companies tend to be making there, or is that necessary at all?
I think the board policies and the committee charters is a question that we're going to be grappling with over time. We started in the lightning round talking about where does it sit, who owns it? And in some ways, I think AI is going to be a lot like risk, where there will be a moment in time when companies really sit down and they say, okay, what does the audit committee need to know about AI and what parts of AI should audit be owning? And look, audit tends to own legal and compliance oversight. So it's kind of obvious what they might own here, even if you don't put the words AI in their charter. But then in the compensation committee, how does AI change the view of human capital management, or how we compensate people, or what we think equitable means? How does it change our objectives and incentives and KPIs? Because that's all coming and probably happening, quite frankly. And then in nominating governance, there's the governance aspect of the company. And there's also, we've already talked about what do you need in terms of directors and director expertise. And then there's the whole board level of how is AI going to impact our strategy? What does it mean about our competitive landscape? And so I think when the board thinks about how to parse out AI, there's going to be an evolution over time. And it's going to be something, there's a reason that companies actually look at their charters and their policies on an annual basis, if not more regularly, because things do change and they need to be somewhat dynamic. But then there's also the part when you ask about like board governance, which is, what are the rules of the road for directors? Like, how should AI implicate presentation, not even presentations, but implicate how a board runs itself? Should your directors be, for instance, sticking their board materials into ChatGPT? And do GCs know if their directors are already doing that? And do they want them doing that? Have they considered the privilege issues? Have they considered the other issues that may occur when sensitive information is put into an open environment. On the other hand, can it make your directors better? Are there opportunities where you can really use AI to help support your board? You've got a handful of individuals who are overseeing a very large company. And how can you leverage the tools that you already have to make them better, smarter, faster at what they already do and have them feel like they've got a little bit of turbocharge behind them?
I think we should do a whole episode on this, Leza, because these are really key issues. Not only what kinds of policies should you put in place for directors, but what's the right role of AI when you bring it into the boardroom? I mean, we see these conversations also, for what it's worth, happening on investment committees. What is the right role for some sort of AI-based tool? Is it challenge? Is it research? Is it synthesis? And how do you think about then supervising the AI that you're bringing into this space with its own obligations and its own duties? So I would love to have you back on to talk about that. I mean, we could definitely spend a whole episode chatting about it. And I know that you and I have already shared a lot of thoughts on this.
Absolutely. Agree. We could probably talk all day, but no one wants to listen to us talk all day. So we'll just make it bite-sized for you.
Yeah. And then we'll read some handbooks on Friday nights together with a glass of wine. All right. Thanks again, Leza.
Thank you.
That's today's drop. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more of the AI Drop, hit subscribe and join us each week for fresh insights on what's shaping the future of AI. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and it does not constitute legal advice or establish an attorney-client relationship. It may be considered attorney advertising, so prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. The views expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of their firms, organizations, or clients. For more information, please visit freshfields.com.